On behalf of the International Institute of Natural Wellness Education, it's my privilege to welcome you to this lecture, part 1 on the wood element in our series on 5-element theory. 5-element theory dates back to traditional Chinese medicine. For thousands of years has been used as an assessment tool to look at the body as a whole. As you know, one of the primary differences in natural medicine and the modern medical systems out there are the difference between isolating a singular problem or a singular group of symptoms and then coming up with a drug or interventive option to stop that group of symptoms. Where in natural medicine, what we're trying to look at is the body as a whole, with this common goal of bringing that body or nourishing that body through activity, through diet, supplementation, and other means. We're trying to allow that body to come back into a state of homeostasis. And it's that homeostatic balance, or that balance of all the systems together, that brings vitality, vibrance, and wellness. As we move along here, and let you know, this is Dr. Hollis, Executive Director here at the International Institute of Natural Wellness Education, and I want to make sure that everyone is very clear that by proceeding, you agree to the following terms of use, including that all information and statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, are not intended to diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure any disease, are for informational purposes only, and by proceeding you agree not to attempt to apply any principle or practice outlined herein unless you are otherwise licensed to do so. Now, many of you are watching this lecture online. This lecture is a part of our Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition program, but there is several lectures that are a part of that program that we make freely available online for people to audit. We want you to be very clear that as such, you're essentially coming in the back of the auditorium and sitting in our classroom so that you can get an idea about the value in a program like the Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition program. Please visit us online at knowyourwellness.org or call us directly at 208-899-2712. Also, encourage you to subscribe here and then like us on Facebook. That way, as we make new videos freely available, you can have access to those, as well as announcements of the live classes that we're holding across the country so that you don't miss an opportunity to participate in some of the classes that we have around the country. I do want to make sure that you again know that since we are providing this for educational purposes only, and specifically for our Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition students, we cannot answer any questions as far as health-related or medical-related questions that you post, that you email, or that you call us with. This is in no way a substitute for medical advice. So with that, let's jump right into 5-element theory. Now, 5-element theory, as I just said, is a way of looking at the body as a whole. One of the things that sometimes commonly confuses people is the use of elements. So if just for a minute, pretend they're not elements. Just think of us taking everything that makes you up, all of your emotions, all of your physiological and biological systems, and if we were to categorize all of those into 5 different groups, that's what the 5-element system is. Now, the reason we term it elements, things like fire, wood, air, water, those sort of things, is because this, as I mentioned, predates any of our assessment techniques of the day. It goes back thousands of years, where it was taught even to young children to understand 5-element theory so they could understand the emotions of those they were with, and they understood the body's processes far better than we educate our children nowadays. And in that, by using the terms fire, wood, you innately helped children to understand and help people that are learning it to understand the interactions between the organ systems and the elements that that represent them. For example, wood, you don't have to tell a child wood makes a fire bigger and water makes a fire smaller. We just innately know that. And so that's why we use the systems that we do. Now, in this lecture, we're not going to go in-depthly into the interactions between, but we're going to talk specifically about the wood element. So let's go ahead and toggle over to this page right here. This is part 1 in our series, and we're going to be discussing the wood element. Now there's one other point that you need to be really clear on, and that is that when we discuss elements, there's two things that we want you to make sure you understand. One is that we'll often talk about a dominant element. Now every one of us has all the 5 elements within us, but everyone has a primary element that's their dominant element, just how they're born. And it deals with the body shape, it deals with your personality, what drives you and motivates you, what interests you have. It really is a much broader spectrum than something like personality typing or color typing. It really gives you a full perspective of how the body interacts, potential weaknesses in the body, and so on. Now, most people also have a secondary element, but we're talking about the dominant element today, or the primary element today that you are. You have all of these. The other thing that we'll be talking about is how to balance an element. Now, the reason I make that distinction is we could talk, for example, I'm a fire element. So we could talk all about the fire element. But anyone, maybe you're a dominant wood element. But that doesn't mean that at some point in your life you're not going to have your fire element out of balance. So when we talk about balancing the elements separately as to not confuse you and have you thinking that that only relates to someone who has that element as their dominant element. So hopefully that makes sense. So you're all going to have a dominant element, but you're going to have the potential of any of these 5 elements as going out of balance. So you need to understand all the different elements. So when you see indicators, you can go, well, even though I'm a fire element, right now my earth element is what's out of balance. So I'm going to work on that. So we'll talk about those two things. And to begin with, we're going to talk about wood dominant elements. Now I've went ahead and done some highlighting here that you can mark on your chart. You should have this chart in front of you as well as the 5 element chart that we're using here. Yours will not have the color coding on the names. You can grab some highlighters, and as we go through that, you can do that yourself. But I went ahead and circled here on this sheet. You can see the dominant element. All those things relate to someone that's a dominant element. Under emotions, the bottom 2, fear, archetype, and spirit, deal specifically with dominant element. And then the understanding column, that is all for someone of a dominant element. And then the last column, balancing, that does not relate to a dominant element, but rather just techniques in balancing, as does the upper portion of the emotion. So that's kind of how this chart breaks down. So the stuff that I've circled is the stuff that's relating to the dominant element. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Now we want to just start by making you aware that face shape and body structure is a part of what your dominant element is. So we're not going to go into in-depth discussion on face analysis and body analysis. We do those in more advanced lectures. But I want to just kind of begin to give you an understanding that that is a part. It's not just personality, it's physical, it's how we look, it's how people carry themselves. All of those things are part of who you really are, which is one of the dominant elements. So the face shape is going to be square, but more of a long rectangular. Long nose and ears, high, wide forehead. That's a good one to note. Sometimes let me toggle over here so I can show you. Sometimes this earth element can have a wide forehead too, but you'll really notice it on the wood element. So kind of keep an eye on that, the tall forehead, that's going to be common. Distinct eyebrows, a lot of times more dark complexion, distinct eyebrows. Those are all characteristic. Narrow cheeks. Narrow cheeks because you have the face shape that's more of this long angular face shape that you see right here. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that we say narrow face or narrow cheeks. So as we toggle back here, those are the features. And we'll talk more in depth about those. But let's talk about mannerisms. Decision making. Man, that's apt, an apt term for really dominant wood element people. That's where a lot of our decision making comes from. In fact, and I don't have this listed here, but it is not uncommon for me when I'm sitting down as a physician talking with someone and in discussion, one of the things that they say they're struggling with right now is decision making or following through. Both of those things are the yin and yang portions of this wood element. Decision making being the yin and the following through being the gallbladder or yang. So if I have somebody that comes in, they're not having trouble following through, but they're having trouble making the decisions, I'm going to question whether I need to nourish and or cleanse this system right here, the yin wood element. On the other hand, if they're making decisions but they're just struggling following through with what they're doing, then I'm going to be looking at the yang or gallbladder part of the wood element. So, really, these aren't just passive things. Decision making is a big part of it when it's in balance. Creative new roots and branches set out every year. We're going to talk a little more as we go through this lecture that for a wood element, that's a very important thing, similar to a fire element. When you go through the fire element lecture, you'll see that fire elements have that need for new things, new projects to kind of feel vibrant and alive. Similarly, the wood element needs to have those, send out roots every year. Not quite as sporadic as the fire element. They can be a little more stable, but they do need to have things changing. Unlike, say, an earth element that is very good in a job that does not change, that doesn't have those new projects. Now, the energy, mental direction is important. Oftentimes, wood elements are very intellectually driven on their decisions. So mental direction is an important thing to them. So, people in this case will often really need to talk through things. They're not going to just, a fire or a metal air especially can just make a decision and move on, where they really need the mental direction that comes with that time. Have the ability to work for the benefit of others. Go ahead and underline that one. That's really an important. The next line is, you can see a big shady tree. That helps you start to understand the shade tree that everyone gathers under the branches. Earth is the earth element is really good at transitioning others and helping other people to transition. And often where people will go to the earth element, water can be very good. A lot of them can be very good listeners. But the wood element, oftentimes people will come to the wood element for strength and support. So a lot of times they would, are very service-oriented people. They help a lot of people. That's very much a part of them. And it's important to them. It's often not as a burden as others might see it. Now, let's talk just for a minute about pathology. Now, again, I want to reiterate that this does not mean that there is any problems in any of these systems. Because someone, say, being a wood element, so if someone is a dominant wood element, the activities, the tasks, the biological processes, everything that is involved in this grouping of wood elements are going to likely be used more. The example I always use is I'm a fire element, and a lot of the things that I do, my job, my personality, who I am, very outgoing, very fire, quick body movements, rapid speech, very much fire movements and activities. As a result, the fire element system will often run out of energy. Now let me pause for a minute and be really clear on something. Sometimes the word energy throws people, especially people that have worked or maybe have a little introduction to natural medicine, be it massage or sometimes people call it energy work, where they're talking about actual bioelectrical energy frequencies from different things like stones or from the earth. And they're talking about an actual, tangible bioelectrical magnetic energy field. We're not talking about that in any way, shape, or form. So when you hear me say fire, energy, I'm just talking about how active all of the systems that are in that fire element are. Likewise, I'm talking about wood energy. I'm not talking about, grabbing a tree and getting some energy from a tree. I'm talking about, not at all, I have nothing to do with that type of energy. What I'm talking about is just, simply put, the term that we use for all of how fast or slow or hard or relaxed all of these systems are. So getting back to the thing I'm pointing out is, if you are a wood element, all of these things are going to be more natural to you, and as such, you are likely going to run the risk of wearing that system out of balance more easily. So once I know someone's dominant element, I always keep an eye on it for the key that it may be the key element that's out of balance. So going back to our list here, all of these things that we're going to go through aren't necessarily that their body has a problem with them, but rather the body is using that system enough that they could need extra nourishment, extra balancing activities, extra herbs, whatever you're using to balance them. So headaches, PMS, digestive issues. Now let me pause right there and come back over here. All of the systems have, as a part of every system, the yang part of every system, you'll see an endocrine gland. So you have the thyroid here under wood. You have water, you have the adrenals. Here under metal, you'd have thymus and hypothalamus. You'd have the pancreas and the blood sugar handling. Up here, you have all the reproductive organs and the triple warmer. So in every system, now, all of those systems, every one of those, because they are part of the hormone regulating system of the body, known as the endocrine system, that system is what regulates all the hormones that communicate throughout your body. Those are very commonly a result for headaches, PMS imbalances, some of these things. The reason we list that here under wood is very simple. Yes, all of these systems have, as a part of them, an endocrine gland. However, type 2 metabolic dysfunction, you may be familiar with it dealing with the pancreas, but all endocrine glands have the potential of having a type 2 metabolic dysfunction, which is a problem that deals specifically with the liver. Because the liver's process is, for most of all the endocrine glands, includes in the P450 pathway of the liver converting, or rather metabolizing, the hormones. The simplest one that you might be familiar with would maybe be T4 and T3. They're thyroid hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. And those thyroid hormones, your thyroid actually produces a majority of T4. But then as the body needs it, and it does that because it's more stable, yet your cells actually use the other one. So your body produces the stable form, and then in the liver, once the hypothalamus says, hey, we need more of that, the liver will instantly convert that or metabolize it into the hormone that your cells are going to use. So again, the reason we talk about PMS imbalance is because somebody could say, well, why isn't that up here under reproduction? And all this will make more sense as you take time and to go through as many times as you need, go through Dr. Newsom's endocrine lectures. He does the endocrinology for us. Professor Newsom is phenomenal with that. And so it'll make more sense. But that's why here under liver, we talk about headaches and PMS. It has a big tie to the wood element and to liver dysfunction. Digestive issues, gallstones, again, liver and gallbladder, they're tied to digestion. Is going to be a result of that. Liver deficiency, dryness, eyes. We're going to talk about eyes in a minute. That's the organ for the sense organ for the wood element. So any eye problems we always look at could be because that element is out of balance. Violence, insomnia, substance abuse. All of those tie right back to the liver. Substance abuse, addictive potentials can have a tie to the liver itself. See how it said violence? Often the hormones that result in violence are an unmetabolized imbalance of testosterone and other aggressive hormones. So again, it goes back to your body's ability to metabolize. Dr. Newsom, one of the things that he says in one of his lectures that I really like that he pointed out, he says how often it is that that mothers usually, it doesn't necessarily need to be, but often mothers will bring in their teenage daughters to our clinic. And one of the their thing is, oh, you've got to do something for her. She's got way too much hormones, just emotional, and as we start to look at it, it's rarely, ever, I've never seen it. I don't know, I can't speak for Dr. Newsom, that young girl that has too many hormones. With very little exception, it's that the body isn't metabolizing them properly, so they're building up in the system. Likewise, with aggressive hormones, they can build up in the system and cause those aggressive tendencies. Again, as we're going to talk a little later on, you'll see that anger is the emotion that can come out of balance here with the liver, or rather the wood element. So the reason a lot of those potential, again emphasizing the word potential, again the reason those potential imbalances can result in the pathology is because of the liver's metabolizing process. Now, human kindness and strength are really, really good, but you need to understand for this, we're jumping on to this next section, virtues and faults. Okay, human kindness is really in some ways very natural for a wood dominant person, because as you remember, they're the big shady tree that everyone comes to, and they become very used to serving and helping other people. However, you need to understand that with that comes, in some cases, a lack of sensitivity. So they're very kind to people, but sometimes can come off hard, similar to a metal air, that they can come off a little hard because they're logically thinking. In the case of a wood element, it's not as much the logical thinking process, it's the hard work. They are working hard, getting things done, and sometimes have a harder time mustering up the sensitivity for others when they just need to sit and talk and vent and discuss everything. Because in their mind, well, let's solve it, let's get some work done, let's do this. Work's a very big thing to a wood element. So let's skip on down past to the bottom section of the emotions as we continue our discussion here on the fears. The greatest fear that commonly is for a wood element is failure or loss of position. This goes right in alignment with their hard work ethic. Their biggest fear is failure. And they are very accomplishment-oriented, driven people. Very, very much so. So failure and loss of position. Archetype, pioneer. That is the perfect archetype term for a wood element. They are the hard-working, they grow things, garden. You'll see some of those as we go along. The ethereal soul, kind of tying the old ways of doing things with the new ways, very much the ethereal soul. So now let's read through some of the really important things for understanding. And a reminder, the understanding is tied to a dominant element, but you need to know it even if it's not your dominant element, because we really want you to be able to understand all the elements. So when you're working with somebody and all of a sudden you know they're a water, you know in their mind the things that help you understand what makes a water element tick. What things motivate them? How, if you need to explain things in more detail or move through them quicker, you start to understand those in people. So understanding water element, the first one here is pushes the limits and seeks challenges. Remember me saying a minute ago how, very pioneering spirit, and as we go back up to the top here, mental decision making, has the ability to work for the benefit of others, work being a real key component. So that's a really good one. We go to the right there. Underline this one. And for all of you that are woods, you're going to be shaking your head thinking no, but anyone who has ever dated you or is married to you will laugh and say, yeah, that makes sense. Like to be first, best, and only. Kind of like metal air, when we talk about that one, and we talk about how they're very realistic to themselves, but to others they come off as pessimistic, and that they like to be right. Mental errors. Well, the reason they like to be right is they're very detailed and articulate, and as such, they often are right. Likewise, because of what makes a wood person tick, because of that drive, the pioneering spirit, the hard work ethic, helping everybody, because of that, they are often first. They're the first to finish things. And they like to be best and only. And that's a real common thing. Just understand, if you're, married to one, it's natural for them to want to be first, best, and only. If you're a wood, understand that's okay. That's who you are. It doesn't mean that others need, that you aren't sensitive to others, but that's why you're the way you are. Admires speed, skill, and novelty. Oh, circle speed. Boy, oh boy, do they admire speed in the workplace and in other things. They just don't want to sit around. They are hardworking. Loves movement, action, and adventure. Performs well and enjoys working under pressure. This one, being a fire, this is the one that is so foreign to me. But, pressure for a true dominant wood, pressure excites them and makes them go faster. They start to see, finally, I have a challenge. I've got this deadline, and am I going to be able to make it? Because they want to prove their first, best, and only. And so it's really fascinating to me to watch this thing of how they like and can like pressure, and it works well for them. Now, as we go along, primary concern is work. You're starting to see a theme here. They are the pioneers. They are hardworking. They, serve others, but sometimes don't want to sit around and be compassionate with others. Intuition. Now, this is an interesting one. Earth element people, or wood element people, dominant personality types might be a better way to say it. They have a very intuitive ability. However, I find more so than other personality types that have a natural intuitiveness, oftentimes I will find that wood element dominated people don't realize they have an intuition. And the reason for that is because so much of their life is dominated by speed and skill and working. Sometimes, even though they are intuitive, they haven't spent the meditative time that a water element might, or or a fire element, and so they don't realize their intuition abilities. So bring it up to them. Say they do have that. Growth and expansion as we continue. Growth and expansion. Remember, as we started, I said we're going to talk in a little bit about how important it is for them to have new growing things. That trees want to send up new roots, out new branches. Unfolding of an individual's potential. Can be childlike. They can have fun when they're going to let down their hair. It's simpler, childlike, enjoyable activities. Now, I know we aren't talking in length about how all of the elements interact. We have those lectures. Some of you have been through them for key element, operator element, cascading elements, and all of that. But I do want to point out one thing. The wood element can be very childlike when it's balanced and bring out that childlike, relaxed enjoyment. Do you remember, if you haven't, or when you go through the fire element, you remember one of the balancing tools for the fire element was rediscovering childlike wonder. Well, the wood, as we've talked, builds fire. So the wood element, increasing the energy of the wood element, will help build that fire to bring out that childlike wonder. Just a real unique tie there that makes that easier to understand. So they can be childlike and curious, very curious. Curious might not be the right word, but they think things through, they solve problems, enduring, like I said, sometimes tactless. Sometimes they're very matter of fact because everything to them is speed, novelty, working hard. I want to help others, but I'm not going to sit and just listen to them blubber about their problems. Let's tactlessly say, this is what you need to do, now let's get it done. And so sometimes that to others comes off as not caring. It isn't not caring, it's caring in their own way. They show their caring through service to others, not as much through the long emotional. Searching for truth. Do you remember me saying how they can be very intuitive, but sometimes aren't in touch with that intuition? And as such, a lot of times spend a lot of time searching for truth. So this kind of gives you an idea of what would make a dominant element tick, what kind of things drive them. Now let's talk for a minute, not on a dominant element front. Let's come back up here to the emotion section and talk just for a minute about the deficiency, balance, and excess of this element. So this again is going to be anybody, regardless of what your element is. I want to point out what can happen if the wood element goes out of balance. And this is a particularly important one because I won't say, and I don't think it's true to say there's more wood dominant personalities than any other element. I really don't think that's the case at all. It's but I will tell you, because of modern toxicity, the wood element goes out quite a lot because the liver's role in metabolizing the hormones and detoxing and helping that process of detoxification in the body. And because of the amount of toxins and the toxic load that we get in our food source and in our environment and in everything around us, this one, regardless of what your dominant element, it can commonly go out of balance. So when we talk about balance, and as you've heard me say when I'm explaining this to people, I always first bring up the balance and say, and I compliment them and start off by saying, when things are in balance, you probably have the ability, to be flexible, patient, discernment, humility, and organized. That hard work brings out the organizing really well. And very patient. They can be being the key word. Now, when you're using this part of you, what I mean by using that part, we've talked about the energies that are involved in a wood element system. So it can come from two places. Maybe emotionally nothing's different, but your liver's getting a lot of toxicity, or gallbladder getting a lot of toxicity, or your thyroid is getting hit if you've been near, if you're getting low-level radiation pollution that would affect the thyroid. When any of these physical systems are affected, then that'll throw out the emotional things that we're talking about. Or maybe it isn't that. Maybe it's that your life right now is requiring you to use a lot more of your wood element and you don't feel in balance. And because you're having to push hard, use hard work, speed, skill, and you're using up that energy more than the other energies, it can go into a state of deficiency. And that's where you're going to start to feel hopeless, ambivalent, unfocused, which is very not natural for a dominant wood element. But again, it isn't necessarily a dominant or not, just anybody that gets that element out of balance. And you'll see this one quite regularly. Resignation, they're just kind of done. I mean, it goes from the hard worker to just, I'm done. And indecision, very opposites of what we've explained to you a dominant wood element person is known for. So then on the other side, if the same things are true, but maybe it's that you don't have you're having to focus on other things, and you don't have the time to really enjoy new projects, send out new branches, or really get out there and work hard and do the things that you enjoy doing, then you're going to go into the opposite state, which is excess, because you have all this wood energy and you don't have an outlet or mechanism for it. Or the other side of it could be that that's one or all of the biological processes that are involved in this are overactive, overproducing, and as such, it's going to result in an excess, which is going to be the belligerent. Judgmental's a really probably good one, and rage. I would underline both of those. Seething, anger. Just seething Oh, yeah, anger, seething anger. Those are all really good ones when that energy gets into an excess state. And so that, so anger is what's so tied into this emotion. Again, we've already explained that that has a lot to do with the liver's metabolism of the endocrine hormones and type 2 endocrine dysfunction. So that's kind of the emotions that will happen. Let's talk for a minute about balancing. Now, healing reactions are going to be things like growing things. Wood element, it's all about trees and wood. Growing things, hiking through the trees, walking, spending time in nature. You could, frankly, you could change that to spend time around trees and woods and forests and that sort of things that are going to tie to that. New projects. Again, why new projects? Because they need to send out the branches. But unlike a fire element who has a need to constantly be stimulated with new projects, a fire element's just fine starting a new project and not finishing it, just getting something started, and then as soon as things are that bug is out of their system, it's good, we're done. On the other hand, wood element individuals, because of their hard work, their ability to really respect speed and novelty and some of those things, they usually won't have the same reaction. A new project for them will need to be a project that they can realistically finish, because unlike with a fire element, where it's really just starting the project and doing something new and different long enough for their brain to start to balance, and then it doesn't really matter if they finish it. On a wood element, they're going to want to finish that project. So when you're talking about new projects, you might say new realistic projects. However, I usually don't have to tell wood people that, because wood personalities think through things. They have the ability to analyze, and they're going to be the ones saying, no, I'm not going to do that project. It's not going to get done. I wouldn't have this. They're going to be the ones analyzing it and telling you, no, that's not the project I'm going to do. Where with a fire element, they're just going to grab some new project. So as we go through the healing reactions, is there any other meditation? Qigong and yoga, I would probably say Qigong or Tai Chi more because of the movement. Yoga has a lot of poses, yoga being the meditative movement coming out of the Ayurvedic culture of India, where Qigong or Tai Chi are coming out of China and Japan. So those are the China, Japan, and India all have a martial arts forum that is less for defense or offense, but more for the movement techniques. And that would be Qigong, Tai Chi, and yoga. So the reason I'm going to say more of the Qigong and Tai Chi over yoga, if they have the potential, is because the movements seem to be in a lot of the thing or exercises, they're going to be more continuous, where yoga is going to have a lot of holding poses and breathing, and that holding still and breathing is going to be good for an air. They're going to probably do better with the yoga. The holding still is going to suit a earth element quite well, but a fire or a wood are going to do a little better with the ones that have a little more consistent, constant movement, like the Tai Chi or Qigong. Meditation is going to be really good for a wood element, but you have to help them, because that work always going, there's always somebody in need. I mean, I've yet to find a dominant wood element that doesn't come with a entourage of people who, family and friends and everyone who knows them comes to them for shade, comes to them to help with a project, to help get something done. They just have that attraction, and so consequently helping them set aside time for meditation. It's not that they have an inability to do the meditation. The metal air elements, they because of the way their personality and body is, it's actually can be very hard for them to just sit and not move and do meditation. They need that movement. The wood doesn't have that. They're fine sitting, but it's more that they don't normally take the time to do it because they're so focused on the other parts of their personality. Now, foods to build: green vegetables, oily fish. Now, why oily fish? Well, look right over here. Gallbladder producing or storing rather the biliary tree in the liver is actually where the bile is produced, but then that is stored in the gallbladder, and that bile is what's used to emulsify and digest and absorb the proper healthy dietary fats. Most commonly we're the one we're deficient in being omega-3. So that's why oily fish are on this list, is to get the amounts of omega-3 so that they can be properly metabolized, because this system is responsible for metabolizing fats. The wood element, or this element is. Red and orange root vegetables, green teas, really good. Really good where it isn't as good for fire elements, but it's really, it works much better for wood elements. Organic liver, that's not one I do a lot, but I don't do a lot of protomorphogen or glandular extracts, and I don't recommend a lot of meat to my clients. So personally, I don't use liver a lot, but that is one that is commonly used in what we call glandular or protomorphogen therapies, where you're actually giving a part of the animal's gland. So you would use a liver from a cow, and that's some of the ingredients in the supplement you're taking is the gland of that animal to help stimulate proper function. And in acute state, those can be useful. I don't encourage them for long-term use. Olive oil and sesame oil, again, all the oils, the healthy oils, the heavy in omega-3. Now, foods to avoid. Alcohol, coffee, including decaffeinated. It is not the caffeine. We just talked about green tea being good, and green tea, it doesn't have as much caffeine because the fermentation process that takes green tea and turns it into black tea ferments the nutrients and turns them into the actual caffeine. So polyphenols is the category. So we have polyphenols that then are fermented into black tea caffeine. But it still has a decent bit of caffeine. So why are we talking caffeine, including decaf? It has to do, and this is kind of an interesting dichotomy, because drinking it is not as recommended for a wood element out of balance, because of the tannins and other things that have to be moved out of the system through the detoxification pathway of the liver. So you can sometimes be adding problems to the liver. Having said that, liver, as we advanced forward and discuss enema therapies, one of the real common ones is for people either in hydrocolon therapy or home enemas to do a coffee enema. That actually is an extremely effective liver cleanse when it's done properly, and we'll teach you how to do it properly. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet on how that's done, but when it's done properly, what happens is you add coffee into the large intestine, the descending and transverse parts of the large intestine, and the hepatic pathways from there take the glutathione in the coffee directly to the liver and help stimulate a cleansing reaction in the liver. So coffee can be used in liver cleanses, but it is not one we recommend drinking. I hope that makes sense. Hot, spicy, greasy foods. The healthy oils are important, but if this system is out of balance, this system is the one that helps metabolize and get rid of fats and healthy oils. And I wish in our language we were more clear on the fat being good and grease being bad, because fat is vital. We need healthy fats. It's grease that's the problem. The unhealthy fats. So that's why we list here, avoid the spicy, greasy foods, caffeinated drinks, large amounts of pickles or vegetables, pickles or vinegars, which is interesting because the taste for this, as we're going to see, is tied to those, but smaller amounts. So those are all going to be activities that are, real quick at a glance right down here under balancing. But you've learned more than just the activities listed here, because as we've went through what kind of makes them tick, you can understand that having the ability to work really hard is useful in balancing that wood element. you understand that some of the things we've talked about are going to naturally balance it. Okay? So with that, stick with us. We're going to go ahead and switch over to the other chart, the 5-element chart that looks like this. So go ahead and get this chart out. We're going to come back with part 2, and we're going to talk more in detail, less about the dominant element, but more about balancing the element and about all the different parts of the body that are included in the wood element. So stay with us. We'll be right back.